Alright, I am back with another build, and today we just have a build that suddenly came to me in a dream. That's not really a joke either. I was like half asleep and then I suddenly thought, wait, that's a good idea. So I decided to try building it today, and then I made the build, tested it, and honestly, it's an extremely fun playstyle. I've been wanting to do a proper dual dagger build for a while, but it's really hard for me to justify doing a dagger build when short swords exist and are just kind of better overall, the higher damage die, and there's very few daggers that I would say in this game actually outshine other similar weapons in other classes. But with this particular build that is reliant on daggers, it makes so much sense. And the unique gameplay style that is going to come about from using this kind of combination that I have here, I think you guys are actually really going to like it. And because this build, in my opinion, actually fits quite well for him, I've decided to bust out Astarion for this one. So yes, the title Frostfang was a pun, but I think by the time we get to the end of this, you'll see why I went for Astarion with this build, because when we're all this said and done, it's going to make a lot of sense. So without further ado, let's get into the build. So the main idea of this build is to be using dual wielding daggers, like I said, in order to inflict certain status conditions that are going to help us control the battlefield, also doing a bunch of cold damage in the process. And the way we go about it, like I say, is going to be very unique, but we do need to build the character a very specific way in order to get exactly what we want out of it. So we're going to be kicking things off as a rogue. This is going to allow us to get sneak attack, a bunch of skill proficiencies, all of the weapon and armor proficiencies we will need, as well as our ability scores. So for our ability scores for this build, they are a little bit strange. Dexterity and Constitution are pretty standard. 16 Dexterity, as it is going to be our main attacking stat, as well as 14 Constitution, which for the purposes of this build is going to be just about good enough. Strength or Intelligence are both at 8 since we don't need them. Wisdom is at 17. We're going to be bumping this up with an item later to make it even, and it was the best way to kind of get the best possible stats out of this build. And finally, Charisma is at 10, because not giving any charisma to Astarion is a bit of a crime. Anyways, as for our skill proficiencies, you can go for a pretty standard rogue set here. Acrobatics, sleight of hand, stealth, insight, perception, which we just get from Astarion being a high elf, deception, and persuasion. Obviously, deception and sleight of hand are coming from his charlatan background, so there you go. Let's move on. Right. Now, one of the reasons we started with Rogue is because how items handle spell save DC in this game. The last class you multi-classed into will be the one that you use for your item spell save DCs, and we're going to want to be able to use our wisdom, so that's why we went for Rogue first, because if we went for Rogue after, we would have had to have used intelligence, which we don't want to do. So now we're going to be going into our main class for this build, and that is going to be Monk, if I can find it. Where did Monk go? There it is. I couldn't find Monk for a second. Anyway, Monk may seem like a bit of an odd choice here, but hear me out. It will make sense the further along we go. But with Monk, we're going to get a few things, namely unarmored defense, making dexterous attacks so we can use our dexterity instead of strength. Not going to matter for us since daggers are finesse, but hey, something to point out. Deft strikes, so now our unarmed strikes are going to be a bit more powerful, and we can make an unarmed strike as a bonus action after using one of our daggers. We're also going to get access to Flurry of Blows, which is going to be a very powerful bonus action option for us. Next up, at Monk level 2, you're going to gain access to unarmored movement, as well as an additional key point, and we're going to gain access to patient defense, which is a very good ability, especially for this build, and I'll explain why later. And then we're also going to be going for Step of the Wind Dash and Disengage. We're going to be getting the Rogue versions of these later, because yes, we are going back to Rogue, but these will do for now. And at Monk level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and here's the fun part about this build. Your subclass doesn't really matter. Pick whatever you prefer. Way of the 4 elements is what I used for my testing, just because I felt like it was the most on theme, you know, ice abilities, so I'll go into that in a bit. However, Way of the Open Hand would work perfectly fine with this build if you just want to go for pure raw damage, nothing wrong with that. And Way of Shadow would also fit absolutely amazingly, giving you access to the darkness abilities, being able to teleport, all that sort of thing. I would recommend maybe throwing on the Eversight Ring and doing Darkness Devil Sight with this build, because that would actually be quite a strong way to play this one. But all 3 of these subclasses actually synergize with this build really nicely in their own way. So honestly, pick your favorites. That's why in the description below I only have it listed that we're going to be using Monk, not a specific subclass. I'm going to be showing off the Way of the Four Elements variant because that is my personal favorite variation of this build, but any of these will work, so feel free to just pick the subclass that makes the most sense for what you want to play. But let's get into Way of the Four Elements. The reason I wanted to go with Way of the Four Elements is because, obviously, ice abilities. And we're going to also get Harmony of Fire and Water, allowing us to, while not in combat, we can regain half our key points, rounded down once per long rest. Not the best. Harmony of Body from Way of Open Hand is better, in my opinion, but this will still do the job if we want to have a bit more resource management. Next up, Disciple of the Elements. So we are going to get to choose some elemental spells for this build, and of course, with a build called the Frostfang that's focused on daggers, we're going to grab Blade of Rime, which is essentially this build's version of Ice Knife. Does the exact same thing, but it costs key points instead, and actually does have a unique animation. A lot of these Disciples of the Elements things, because they're technically not spells, they're considered class actions, so they don't work with spell items, but they also work while silenced and raging, so, you know, there's ups and downs. But the thing is with all of these, they actually have, like, different animations that look a bit more like Kung Fu-y, which I think is quite fun. So, anyways, we can pick up a couple of other spells as well. Well, not spells, but you get the point. We're going to grab Chill of the Mountain for Ray of Frost, because it's slightly less, resource intensive. It costs a little bit less key than Blade of Rime. And we're also going to grab Water Whip. Yes, Ice Cube is there, as well as Sphere of Elemental Balance, which can also grant us ice, but come on, Water Whip is such a unique thing to do, being able to knock targets prone, which is going to be a part of this build that we're going to kind of be able to do anyway, but this is another way to do it, and that's going to help to get advantage for sneak attack, as well as we can pull enemies closer towards us as well, which if you've got a pesky ranged enemy who keeps moving away from you, this can be a fun way to bring them in line. It's just a fun spell, might as well use it. Not spell, class action. Man, sometimes I hate the way this game works. Anyways, Monk, level 4. More key points and resistance to falling damage. Can't go wrong. The main thing we're getting here at this point is a feat, and you have to make a choice. Do you want your weapons to have a higher chance to hit and do more damage, or do you want to focus on your 4 element spells? If you're not playing a 4 elements monk, then just go for a bump to dexterity here. If you are, then you have the choice. I'm going to go for dexterity here anyway, but you could go for either or. Next up, at Monk level 5, we are going to get extra attack as well as the Stunning Strike features. Stunning Strike is going to be quite useful in some cases, so I'm quite happy to have it here. Next up, at Monk level 6, we're going to gain access to Key Empowered Strikes, meaning that unarmed strikes are now going to overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage, as well as the fact that we're going to get more unarmored movement as well as more Key as well. We also do get to choose another Disciple of the Element at this point, and I would personally suggest picking up Clench of the North Wind. Clench of the North Wind is going to be probably one of the better spells you can kind of pick up. It costs 3 key points, which is a bit pricey, but being able to basically use Hold Person is pretty damn nice, but feel free to swap this out for anything that you like. I just flavour it as us freezing our enemies solid. Next up, at Monk level 7, we are going to gain access to Evasion, which is going to allow us to basically take less damage from dexterity saving throws things, taking half damage on a fail and no damage if we succeed, which is very nice. We're also going to get Stillness of Mind, meaning that we automatically remove the condition of Charmed and Frightened, so that's pretty good. And we also do get more Key. Next up, at Monk level 8, we're going to gain access to another key point as well as our next feat, which I'm going to plop into Wisdom. You'll see why in a minute. And finally, at Monk level 9, we're going to gain access to Advanced Unarmored Movement and Improved Elemental Casting, meaning that all of our 4 element spells are going to do extra damage. Also, the reason I want to go to level 9 of Monk is now our Monk weapon damage die, our martial arts die, is now the highest it can be in the game, which is a D8 of damage, meaning that we've taken the dagger's paltry D4 of damage and turned it into a D8. So now it is on par with something like a one-handed longsword, which is pretty damn good. So now our daggers are going to be doing a lot of damage. So that's the main reason I wanted to go to level 9 of Monk here, and that's why Monk is such a cornerstone of this build, because it actually makes daggers have a decent damage die. Now, next up, we do get another Disciple of the Element spell, and you know what? Let's grab the cube. Now, we don't need anything else from Monk at this point, so let's go back to Rogue, picking up Cunning Action Hide, Dash, and Disengage, meaning now that we can do these things as a bonus action without having to spend a resource. Now, next up, again, we're going to be picking our rogue subclass. Arcane Trickster could be fun if you want to go that route, but I personally would not recommend it for this build. Assassin could absolutely work, especially if you're playing the Shadow Monk variant of this build, in which case I would absolutely recommend Assassin, but with the Open Hand and Wear the Four Elements variants, I would recommend the Thief subclass for that extra bonus action, because, come on, we're dual wielding. We want that extra bonus action. And monks love the extra bonus action, so, you know, might as well. Ooh, that's a rather cinematic shot, but let's get back to what I actually intended, game. Thank you. So, I went over that pretty quickly, because like I said, the actual monk subclass that you choose doesn't really matter, and there's even some variance in the rogue subclass. So the actual leveling scheme of this build is not that important. You just want to make sure that you have that 9-3 split to get the most possible damage out of your daggers. Like I said, that 1d8. So, but like I said, I can't speak right now. But basically, like I said, so the actual leveling scheme doesn't matter, but what you're going to be getting out of this is a ton of different ways to move around the battlefield. You're going to get lots of damage out of your daggers. You're also going to have a great amount of battlefield control thanks to Water Whip, Blade of Rime, Ray of Frost. You're going to have Clench of the North Wind to be able to do big damage when you need to. You're going to be able to stun certain enemies with Stunning Strike, and you're going to be able to get off big damage with Sneak Attack when it becomes available. But the question is, why? This build is fairly simple. It's a fairly standard monk rogue build that many people have made. So what actually makes this build different? Like I said, it's the equipment. And let me just say, this playstyle is so incredibly fun. So let's get into the main thing, and the main thing that made me want to make this build work, and that was the weapons. Rhapsody and the Cold Snap. Rhapsody is just the best dagger in the game, and again, another reason I wanted to play Astarion, because this weapon is directly tied into his questline. You gain a +1 bonus to attack rolls, damage, and spell save DC for every foe you kill, up to a maximum of 3. So that stacks on with the +1 bonus that the weapon innately has, and the +1 bonus that I've done with the Drakethroat Glaive, because yes, I did put the Drakethroat Glaive on this weapon for that extra d4 of cold damage. You'll see why in a minute. So that can actually get us up to a total of +5 on the weapon attack and damage rolls, and also helps our spell save DC. We don't have any spells, but hey, it's there. We also can possibly inflict bleeding when hitting creatures with this weapon while hiding or invisible, playing into our roguish aspect a bit, so that would work nicely for the, the Way of Shadow variant. And of course, in the offhand, we have the Cold Snap, which is what made this whole build come together. While this is in your offhand, you get a +1 bonus to your armor class, which is great, but you also gain access to Chilling Counter. When a creature misses you with an attack, they must succeed a DC 13 con save, or be chilled for 2 turns. Chilled makes the affected entity vulnerable to cold damage. That means that all the cold damage we would be doing from Way of Four Elements, our daggers, both of them, like I say, they're both buffed with the Drakethroat Glaive, giving them a +1 and an extra d4 of cold damage. Like, all of that's going to be doubled, which will stack up to be quite a lot. I didn't include the ball list armor on this build, but if you want to forego the unarmored defense and instead bump up maybe your dexterity a bit more instead of your wisdom, and then go for the ball list armor, still get high AC that way, and then also make enemies vulnerable to piercing damage, you would be going for absolute overkill with this build. But I wanted to focus a bit more on the actual ice side of things, but feel free to use the ball list armor if you like, once you get to Act 3. Anyways, but yeah, basically the whole strategy is brought together by the Cold Snap and the Rhapsody. The problem is both of these are only available in Act 3, so the main crux of this playstyle is not going to come online at least until the very start of Act 3, where you can get the Cold Snap. But I do have some early game options that I think will provide a fun playstyle, and as long as you buff them up with the Drakethroat Glaive once you hit Act 2, you will still be able to do the majority of what this build is capable of doing, because the rest of the equipment is all early game. So let's take a look at it. First up, the Susa Dagger, which is going to just come with a +1 bonus and can also silence targets on hit, so might as well pick that one up. And in the offhand, you can have the Ritual Dagger, which allows you to use Blood Sacrifice. After a successful attack with a dagger, the wielder rolls a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws until the end of the next turn. So basically, it just means you can get a buff to all of your attacks, which is quite nice. Again, you take a little bit of damage, but that's not a huge deal. Oh yeah, that's if you do a Blood Sacrifice. You also can do it after an successful attack as well. But Blood Sacrifice can also basically say if you do it to yourself, so basically do it to your enemies or do it to yourself. one or the other. These are some decent early game weapons to start you off with, especially since with this build you're probably not going to be attacking with the offhand dagger that much. You're mainly going to be focusing on using unarmed strikes and flurry of blows, because obviously we don't have 2-weapon fighting with this build, so cold snap is going to be a bit weaker. But once you start getting that vulnerability to cold damage, cold snap will still be a very, very valuable option. I think I was using my offhand attack when we had all the buffs stacked up. Even without 2-weapon fighting, cold snap was still doing upwards of like 20 damage per hit, which is pretty damn powerful. So that's without 2-weapon fighting. If you wanted to somehow get that on this build, maybe throwing on the gloves of the balanced hands, then you absolutely could. But the setup that we have here is still going to work perfectly. I've thrown the Darkfire shortbow on here because there's literally no reason not to. You gain resistance to fire and cold damage and a usage of haste. We're not really concentrating on much else with this build, so just throwing on haste and getting even more AC is really, really important. Because again, you're going to be able to attack more, you're going to get more movement speed, which means you're going to be zooming, and that extra AC bumping us up to a total of 24 is actually going to be really important, because obviously the cold snap relies on our opponents missing us, which is why, again, unarmored defense is so nice, giving us a total of 22 AC with everything said and done. But let's get into the rest of the equipment to kind of see how we get the rest of that. First up, we have the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. This is pretty much the main reason I wanted to make sure we took Rogue as our starting class, because with the Diadem of Arcane Synergy, whenever we inflict a condition, which we can inflict multiple, like Chilled, we gain Arcane Synergy. Now, an Arcane Synergy allows us to do extra damage equal to our spellcasting ability modifier. Now, even though we're not a spellcasting class by technicality, every class still has a spellcasting ability modifier. For example, because Arcane Trickster exists, rogues have intelligence. Obviously, monks have wisdom. Hell, I think barbarians have charisma, which is kind of funny. That makes a barbarian bard build something I still need to do, a very tantalizing option. But Arcane Synergy is going to be great for this build because we have maxed out wisdom. That means we're going to be doing extra damage on all of our attacks once we kind of get the ball rolling. Basically, at the end of the day, I think in my testing, the highest I could get in a damage bonus with the daggers was like a plus 13, 14, which is pretty damn good. That's not including the vulnerability to the cold damage that we're also doing. So this build is pretty damn strong. We're also going to be picking up the Cloak of Protection to give us a +1 bonus to armor class and saving throws. It's just more armor class, that's what we want. Next up, the Iceblight Robe, just a fun robe that fit the build. We're going to gain resistance to cold damage, we're going to gain the ability to cast Armour of Agathis on ourselves at level 3, giving us 15 temporary HP and dealing 15 cold damage to any creature who hits us with a melee attack, so it's just a bit of extra tankiness, and it's an early game option, like I said, so it's quite nice. But if you want to pick up the Ballist Armour in Act 3 and maybe swap your Wisdom and Dexterity around as far as stats go, then you absolutely could do that and get even more power out of this build. But I just quite liked using the Iceblight Robe here instead of the typical power building options, so that's what I went for. I feel like it felt more on theme for the build, but again, the Ballist Armour would probably be optimal. Next up, the Winter's Clutches. Whenever we deal cold damage, which is all the bloody time, we can inflict 2 turns of Encrusted with Frost. Encrusted in Frost means the affected entity has disadvantage on dex saves, meaning that they're more likely to fall prone on ice surfaces. So how that works with us is going to be really nice, because we have a way of setting up ice surfaces with a lot of the things we do. Blade of Rime, for example. But also our attacks themselves will be able to inflict cold damage surfaces thanks to the Snowburst Ring. Whenever we deal cold damage, we create a 4.5 meter circle of ice around the target. And because, thanks to Encrusted in Frost, they'll have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws, they're going to be falling prone constantly. And you'll remember that prone enemies have advantage to hit against them. That means that Sneak Attack can be used on prone enemies, so the build synergizes by knocking enemies over, ending their turns, creating great battlefield control, and then being able to sneak attack them on the next turn. It's actually an extremely powerful strategy, and not a single spell is required to do it, because we have cold damage baked into everything we do. But Encrusted with Frost also comes with some extra effects, like the fact that when there are 7 or more turns remaining, the target must succeed a con save or take 1d4 cold damage and become frozen. Frozen means that they are completely incapacitated until they are dealt bludgeoning, thunder, or force damage, which is pretty damn good. Like, honestly, this is an extremely fun way to just deal battlefield control, knocking enemies over, getting big sneak attacks off, dealing massive amounts of cold damage with an absolute flurry of attacks, with both unarmed and melee strikes with our daggers, being able to haste ourselves to just zoom around and have massive amounts of AC. It's just brilliant. But of course, if we're going to be creating all of these ice surfaces, then we are going to need the Disintegrating Nightwalkers to make it so that we cannot be enwebbed, entangled, ensnared, and we cannot slip on grease or ice. Because, of course, if we create all this ice surfaces, that's going to be no good for us if we end up falling flat on our arse as well, basically getting no advantage from it and actually putting us in a dangerous position. So the disintegrating Nightwalkers are going to be great. They're also going to give us a usage of Misty Step, which, again, kind of felt on theme for this build, kind of like this frosty mist zipping around the battlefield, and it's going to give you a way to get out of danger if you need to, or get straight into melee combat, again, if you have someone that's running away from you. They're just too perfect for this build to not include them, even though I use them way too much. Next up, Khalid's Gift. This is going to be what gives us that +1 to Wisdom to round it out to a total of 20. It's also going to give us Aid to give us an extra 10 hit points, so just a bit more tankiness. Nothing we don't love. We've already gone over the Slow Burst ring, and we finally have the Ring of Protection for another +1 to armor class and saving throws, just giving us the most amount of AC we can. But this isn't 100% necessary, but it definitely helps. But if you don't like the whole faff you have to go through to get this, then you can do something else instead. Originally, before I kind of had the idea to use Khalid's Gift, I did also have the Amulet of Misty Step here, so this could also be a good early game option for you until you get Khalid's Gift. And everything you see here is coloured in black and azure dye to get this, well, black and azure look, which I think kind of suits Astarion in a weird way. I don't know. He's kind of like more of those purples and such, though, isn't he? So I don't know. But overall, that is the build. Like I say, what you're going to be getting out of this is a massive amount of damage, a huge amount of versatility, battlefield control, and just an extremely fun playstyle. It's a shame that the main crux of like the power building aspect, which is being able to dodge and get the chilled condition, isn't going to come online until Act 3, but up until then, you're still going to have access to creating the ice surfaces, knocking people prone, and then being able to sneak attack them afterwards. If you go with Way of the Four Elements Monk, you're going to have a massive variety of fun ice spells to use, like things like Water Whip, like I said. But again, the Way of the Shadow variant, being able to teleport around, do Darkness Devil Sight to gain constant advantage, and then making a cloud of darkness with ice underneath it that enemies just keep slipping on and they can't attack you, and it's just an absolute nightmare for them. That can be an extremely fun combo. And Way of the Open Hand is Way of the Open Hand. You just activate Wholeness of Body and go absolutely ballistic for a few turns with 3 total bonus actions, and just all of the massive extra damage that would come out of that, being able to apply Necrotic Radiant or Psychic to your unarmed strikes, so you do even more damage that way, and you would just be able to absolutely blitz any enemy that comes your way. So any monk subclass is going to work really nicely for this, but I personally like the Way of the Four Elements version because I just like the ice theming here, and also finally getting to make a dual dagger build just felt so fun, and being able to make one with such a unique gameplay style that's totally focused around dodging and counterattacking in a unique and fun way. I don't know, I just really liked this build, and it just suddenly popped into my head. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to make this tomorrow, and I think it worked out brilliantly. And you can see from the combat footage that we did have a bit of a slow start, but then as soon as the build starts ramping up and those status and conditions get inflicted, well, the enemy didn't really stand a chance. Obviously, there is the chance that you will get hit, and especially if you have haste up with that 14 in Constitution and no real way to bump up those saves, it can be a bit dangerous. As you see, I did lose concentration pretty much once I got hit, and I was lethargic for a turn, but then I was able to immediately bring it back and just do the rest afterwards. But yeah, I think this build is actually going to be a ton of fun. All of the pieces synergize together quite well. Astarion himself in particular gets quite a lot out of it thanks to his bite attack, giving him that little extra bit of piercing damage, and you can get that happy condition, which is going to help you out in a few other ways. Like, if I'm being honest here, this is a pretty damn good Astarion build. And if you're not a huge fan of the fashion, then you can kind of fix that with camp clothing or the ballist armor, like I said, which I think always looks good on Astarion, especially in black and azure, if you decide to dye it that way, and just go absolutely crazy. Honestly, this build is extremely fun. This might be my go-to build for Astarion for a little bit, just because I actually really enjoy it. Just the sheer amount of like fun gameplay interactions that you get out of this setup is just too good. I absolutely love it. And this build would work amazingly on Ascended Astarion as well, if you decide to go down that route, because we know that all of Ascended Astarion stuff works with Monk unarmed strikes, which means, you know, damn. So yeah, this build can work with either regular or Ascended Astarion, which means you're just going to get a ton of damage and a ton of fun interactions, like I said, no matter what. But yeah, that is the build. That is everything I have to say about that. But of course, I mean, most of you probably would have already, well, I say most of you, some of you will have already seen the video that I posted yesterday, which was my thank you, my heartfelt thank you for 10,000 subscribers, because we actually bloody did it. I am still in shock. This is the first video I've made that is an actual build video since that happened, and honestly, I am still blown away by it. The amount of support that I had yesterday, the well wishes, the congratulations, well, it warmed my cold heart. See what I did there? Because you know it's a nice video. Yeah, okay. But no, genuinely, thank you for a 10,000, and here's to whatever else happens in the future. Right, I think that is going to do it for me. I think I will leave the video here. So, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.